And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Okay, starting off the marine segment here with tonight's weather, showing next system here moving eastward along the Aleutians with a widespread area of light rain, fog, and drizzle here approaching the Alaska Peninsula late tonight, and then that'll extend all the way out to Shiminatu. Otherwise, we've got this system dropping east-southeast where it brings a chance of rain into the coastal areas of the Panhandle, stays dry over the inside waters. Drying out from the North Gulf Coast, south central Alaska. Still a weak thing right through here, producing some shower activity into the northern Kuskokwim Valley and Alaska Range. Otherwise, diminishing showers in the Susitna Valley, as well as up in the interior. Continued dry with some clearing for the north slope out to the Arctic coast with mild temperatures and chance of rain and showers there for the Seward Peninsula, actually Norton Sound, all the way up across the Noatak-Selawik Valley areas to the western Arctic coast. And for tomorrow, this system slides on down out of the picture, now no longer a factor for anywhere north of the Queen Charlotte Islands, just partly sunny skies for the southeast coast with a risk of a shower or two. Dry in the Gulf of Alaska with light winds and relatively dry for the North Gulf Coast. Still a chance of showers coming in with this moisture here into northern Cook Inlet and the Susitna Valley. Scattered showers in the Copper River Basin and the Matanuska Valley. But quite an area of showers and rain here in the central and western interior, back to that weakening low center there along the northwest coast. Kind of a break here for the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, Bristol Bay, but this area of rain spreading northeastward all the way into southwest Kodiak Island during the afternoon, and extending periods of rain for the Alaska Peninsula to the eastern Aleutians, and some gusty northwest winds, maybe up to 40 miles an hour, coming into the Adak area over to about Amchitka Island. And for the next day, high pressure here follows this system in as it tracks eastward ahead of the next system way out there to the west. It'll bring increasing wind and rain to Shiminatu. This system bringing gale force winds into the North Gulf Coast and at least the western Gulf of Alaska during the day, with possible gale force winds out of the northwest here over the eastern Aleutians and western Alaska Peninsula there, but lots of rain here from Bristol Bay and the southern Kuskokwim Valley and Togiak Bay area right into the North Gulf Coast, with periods of rain likely for the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, especially western Cook Inlet up to the western Alaska Range. Drier here in the central interior with mostly cloudy skies, isolated showers, a little more enhanced there along the Brooks Range or just to the south of that weak trough axis there, but stays dry and mild for the north slope out to the Arctic coast. Weak high pressure moving into the Panhandle. Produce another day, much like today, down over the southern areas with mostly sunny skies, temperatures into the 60s, and then cooler conditions up to the north with a slight risk of a shower. And then for the coastal water forecast here for the south coast of the Panhandle, east-southeast winds at 15 knots, otherwise northwest to northeasterlies on the central coast at 10 to 15 knots with 5-foot seas, light variable winds for the north coast. And for Lynn Canal, north winds at 10 knots, northeast at 10 for Stevens Passage, and southeast at 10 for Clarence Strait. And for the next day, northwest at 10 for Clarence Strait there, otherwise southeast breeze at 10 knots for the central and northern inner channels. West-northwest, 15 knots for the south coast, south-southeast, 10 to 15 knots on the central coast. And then the effects of that front starting to show up here in the extreme north coast, those winds becoming east and increasing to 25 knots. Seas up here building to 12 to 14 feet. Prince William Sound for Tuesday, light variable winds. Same thing for the North Gulf Coast tomorrow, light variable winds with seas down to 4 feet. And for Cook Inlet, south winds 20 knots, seas 5 feet, southwest at 15 for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, southerlies at 15 knots. Then for Wednesday, big increase in these winds, kind of the calm before the storm here. As you can see, eastern North Gulf Coast, east winds 40 to 45 knots with seas building to 12 feet. Gale warnings here for the western North Gulf Coast, northeast increasing to 35 knots with 9-foot seas. Big increase in the winds for Prince William Sound as well. East at 30 knots, seas building to 7 feet. Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, north winds 25 to 30 knots with 6 to 8 foot seas. And north winds at 30 knots here for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay area. Kodiak Island tomorrow, south to southwest winds at 15 to 20 knots. Alaska Peninsula, south to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And Bristol Bay, southeast winds at 15 knots. And then for the day on Wednesday, gale warnings here on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. West winds 35 knots, otherwise the Pacific side looking at westerlies at 30 knots. Southwest 30 knots for Bristol Bay, 5-foot seas there. And Kodiak Island, west winds 20 to 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, south to southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Adak and Atka, southwest at 15 to 20 knots. And for the western Aleutians here, anywhere from west to northwest winds at 20 to 25 knots. Then for Wednesday, again, that next front starting to pick the winds up, turning it more southerly and increasing them to about 30 knots from the south with seas up around 10 feet. Otherwise, Adak and Atka, west winds at 15, 4 to 7 foot seas there. Small craft advisories for the eastern Aleutians, west-northwest winds at 25 to 30 knots with seas running 7 to 10 feet. And for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, winds south at 15, otherwise southwest winds 15 knots there. St. Lawrence Island, the Yukon Delta coast, and Norton Sound. Pribilof Islands, light variable winds. In fact, the Bering Sea here, light variable winds at 10 knots from St. Matthew Island to St. George. And then for the day on Wednesday, Pribilof's northwest, 25-knot winds there, seas up to around 10 feet. Lighter winds for St. Matthew Island, west at 15. Good small craft advisories here south of Nunivak Island for north winds at 30 knots. And for Norton Sound, north at 15 for St. Lawrence Island and the Yukon Delta coast. For the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, kind of a variable wind pattern there at 10 to 15 knots, otherwise south at 10 knots for the western Arctic coast. And the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coastlines looking at east or east-southeast winds at only 15 knots with 3-foot seas. Then for the day on Wednesday, central and east side here, winds right out of the east at 20 knots, seas 4 to 5 feet. North at 15 there for the western Arctic coast with 3-foot seas, and northwest winds 10 to 15 knots for the Chukchi Sea and seas only about 2 to 3 feet.